So we still may have a couple people joining us this morning, but they can kind of trickle in as they need to. But yeah, again, for the sake of time, we're going to get started here. So my name is Baz. I'm a queer non-binary person. My pronouns are they, them. And I am here from Spectrum today to do a wonderful little lunch and learn with you all today. So as I mentioned before, because we're recording, totally understand if you don't want to have your cameras on for the recording. But yeah, if you do feel comfortable to have them on, that would be very, very nice. And most of us know in this, like, again, online kind of atmosphere to keep your microphones off just for the sake of lack of background noise. But there will be times throughout the session if you wanted to turn them on to ask a question, please feel free to do so. With questions in mind, one of the really great things about online kind of programs like this is there's a lot of different ways that you can ask questions. So obviously the main one is you can use the little like raise hand feature on Zoom. If you don't know about that, under your reactions tab, there's a little raise hand thing. You can just raise it and then we'll pass the microphone over to you. You can always just like turn off your microphone and interrupt as well. That's really fine. And then there's also the chat box, right? So throughout the session, you can ask a question in the chat box. So you can take your time crafting that question. And you can also ask that question anonymously as well. So you can change the little drop down beneath your message to just my name, and it'll go to just me, and I can ask your question aloud, but won't put your name to it. So if you have a question, but you don't want your peers knowing who asked it, please feel free to ask it that way as well. Let us get started with our land acknowledgement. So it's important that we note that we can't advocate for the liberation of the 2S LGBTQ plus community without acknowledging the harm that we've caused others, including those within our own community. So Spectrum acknowledges the truth that we're situated on the Haldeman Tract, which is the traditional land of the Haudenosaunee and the Mississauga and Anishinaabe nations. We also recognize the Chinootan peoples of what have become to be known as the neutral nations, which are people entirely eliminated by the colonization of this land. This territorial acknowledgement alone can accomplish justice, and we're committed to working towards reconciliation and ensuring that our programs, services, and practices are culturally relevant and accessible to Indigenous people in our community. This is just a shorter version of a much longer land acknowledgement that we have on our website. And I always like to say that land acknowledgements are very nice. They're important, but I like to think of them as a great time for self-reflection. So whenever you hear one, you can kind of self-reflect on like, okay, what am I doing in my own life, whether it's donating time, resources, money, or even just starting your journey on understanding what reconciliation means, reading the calls to action, those types of things, that also counts. So anything like that, just a great time for self-reflection when it comes to reconciliation. So before we begin, for those of you who don't know, Spectrum Waterloo Region is a registered charity and Waterloo Region's first ever 2S LGBTQ+ / rainbow community space. We offer a ton of different groups and activities each month. I think it's like 30+ right now. So we have like transgender peer support groups. We have Rainbow Newcomers Connect. We also have a games night, I think every other Friday, which is really, really popular. Apparently last time we had one, it was like 30 people showed up, and it was like, we have this like smaller space. So it was a bit of a having to sort things out there, but it was, yeah, really, really popular. So that's great. We also offer things like the 2S LGBTQ+ legal aid clinic, which is known across Canada. We also have a great lending library of books and movies. If you are interested in getting your hands on some queer literature at all, we have a lot of great books there. And we also do a directory of 2S LGBTQ+ friendly businesses and organizations within Waterloo Region. So in partnership with the OK to Be Me program at KW Counseling Services, which I think is now called Camino, we also subsidize the cost for mental health counseling for 2S LGBTQ+ adults. So if that is you, please feel free to look into that. We are happy to give you some free sessions with a counselor. And lastly, we of course offer training like you are in today. So before we begin, we also like to acknowledge that I, as a presenter, can only speak to my own experiences, right? There are a lot of different types of people within our community, and we did our best to include as many voices as possible when we crafted this presentation, but of course that picture can never be 100%, right? So what's most important is that you believe the people who are telling you their identities and telling you their experiences. So even if it sounds different than what I'm telling you, their identity and their experience is far more important than the information that I'm going to give you today. We're basically going to be talking about some like basic terminology and some jargon, and some of that information might be a little bit overwhelming to you. But what's important is obviously that you just remember the main concepts, and you can always do a quick Google or go to Spectrum's website for a refresher on some of these terms. And we also invite you to sit in the discomfort of learning new things that you may not understand, and the discomfort of unlearning strong and unconscious beliefs and challenging those previous learnings. And to any 2S LGBTQ plus individuals in the audience, please be aware that some of the topics we engage in may be a little bit distressing. So please take care of yourself. If you need to turn your camera off or step away from the computer, feel free to do so, no problem at all. So this is just our agenda for today. So we're going to start. Our largest section is the first section there, the terminology and key concepts. Again, that's just strengthening your ideas of some of the main things within our community, like gender, sexuality, those types of things. We're going to talk a little bit about intersectionality and privilege, and then we're going to finish today by just basically talking about what you can do with that information, right? How we can be better allies. So getting started here. Sex versus gender. In the English language, we use these two terms very interchangeably, but in reality, they actually mean very different things. So gender identity, or just gender in general, is a person's internal sense of self, right? It's the thing that tells you, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm non-binary, I'm whatever. And it may or may not align with the gender that you were assigned at birth, right? So that gender assigned at birth, we know when a baby is born, a doctor takes about a 4-second look at a baby, looks at one very specific part of a baby and just decides it's going to be a girl, it's going to be a boy. Of course, we know that biology is a lot more complex than that, which we'll get into in a second. But there are obviously more than two genders. There's also more than two sexes, which is an important thing as well. So that gender binary of just saying it's a boy or it's a girl overlooks intersex people, which we also will talk about in a little bit more depth in a little bit, and also people with genders outside the gender binary, like myself. So the other thing to remember is sexuality is, of course, separate from sex and gender. Sexuality is the people that we are attracted to, right? So we have gender, which is that internal sense of self. We have sex, which is the physical makeup of your body. So that's like chromosomes, that's hormones, that's genitalia, internal reproductive organs, those types of things. And then we have sexuality, which is completely external to ourselves. It's who we're attracted to. So as I mentioned, biological sex is that physical makeup of our body. It's that, chromosomes, it's genitalia, hormones, internal reproductive organs. None of those define your gender, though. Gender is a completely societal construct, and we know this because gender has changed throughout history. It changes throughout cultures, right? What a woman looks like here and culturally is here will be a lot different than places like India or Russia or Asia or any of those places, right? And even throughout history, right? We look back at men in the 1700s, for instance, wore wigs and powdered their faces and wore high heels. And now if a man did that, he'd be a drag queen, right? So like gender changes, it shifts, it is always ever changing. It'll look different in 100 years. And those are just societal constructs. That biological sex is different than that. We also have two terms on here that honestly you probably will never have to use. They're pretty rare even within our community. So AFAB and AMAB. Assigned female at birth and assigned male at birth. Really, the only time we use these is to like dictate our experiences growing up. So like myself will as an AFAB non-binary person will maybe have a slightly different experience of growing up as an AMAB non-binary person. But other than that, we don't really use those terms very much. We also have two other important terms here. So cisgender, which is somebody whose gender, so that internal sense of self, aligns with their biological sex. So if you were born and the doctor said it's a girl and you grew up and you were like, I am a girl, yes, I feel like a woman, you're cisgender, congratulations, great thing. And that is the majority of people, right? So yeah, that's just the opposite of transgender. And transgender, as most of you probably know, is somebody whose gender, so that, again, that internal sense of self, does not align with that biological sex that they were assigned at birth. So with those two kind of thoughts in mind, let's talk a little bit about heteronormativity and cisnormativity. So heteronormativity is when a man is only attracted to women and a woman is only attracted to men. Heteronormativity is the assumption that all people are heterosexual, right? So basically the people that you meet on the street, the cashier at the grocery store, whatever the case might be. And we make these assumptions all the time in our society. by doing some of the examples here. So one of them is asking a woman if she's bringing a husband or boyfriend to an event, right? That's obviously assuming that she is interested in men, but it's also assuming that she's interested in romantic relationships at all. She may not be. So it's better to say things like partner or friend, plus one, those types of things. Asking about a child's mom and dad on forms. Not only does this assume a typical family unit in terms of like only having a mother or father, they could have two moms, two dads. This also goes beyond that, right? Like a lot of us come from non-traditional family structures, right? We have maybe divorced parents, so we have two sets of moms and dads. We have maybe we're growing up with our grandparents. Maybe we only have one mom because, you know, we had a single mom or whatever the case might be. Our dad or mom might not be in the picture. There's a lot of different ways that those non-traditional families kind of come up. A really, really big one is assuming that people in male-female relationships are straight, right? Maybe you see a couple or you meet a couple at a dinner party, let's say, and they appear to be a man and a woman and they are together. We just assume that because they are together that they are straight. But in reality, both or one or yeah, one of those people could be bisexual, pansexual, list goes on. It's also possible that maybe they are not a man and a woman, like maybe they're non-binary, you know what I mean? We can't make those assumptions. We also use the example of a Sadie Hawkins dance here, but I feel like that's very dated. For those of you who don't know what a Sadie Hawkins dance is, it used to be when a girl would ask the boy out to a dance, like it was the one dance where the girl could ask the boy. Obviously, again, when we're talking about heteronormativity, it's assuming that the girl wants to ask a boy, but I think now it's just kind of silly. Like we want to start breaking down those gender norms of like it has to be the boy asking the girl. It's like if you like a person, you should just ask them out. It doesn't really matter what their gender is, right? So we talked about cisgender, right? So that's somebody whose gender aligns with the biological sex they were assigned at birth. So cisnormativity in that manner would be that we assume that the people that we meet are cisgender, right? So ladies and gentlemen and guys is a really common thing for a lot of people to say. And I know a lot of people do use guys as a gender neutral. I do it as well. But when we actually think about talking to groups of people that we don't know very well, it's good to kind of drop that, right? Because when we think about it, guys is not actually that gender neutral. I always like to use the example of like, ask your nearest cisgender heterosexual man how many guys he slept with recently. He probably will not be very fond of that answer, right? So it's better if you don't know the people that you're talking to just drop that. Folks is really good. Everyone, I say y'all. I'm not Southern, but y'all is a great gender neutral. Like, hey y'all, like, how's it going? Like those types of things. So yeah, y'all is another really great replacement. Male female bathrooms and clothing sections especially don't really understand that we pretty much all wear the same clothing except for dresses. For some reason people get really up in arms about that, but we all pretty much wear jeans, blouses, t-shirts. Like we share a lot of similar clothing, so why not start breaking those down? A huge one here, asking if a baby is a boy or a girl, right? Now that we know, obviously, there's a difference between gender and sex. What you're asking when you're asking that is, in reality, does your baby have a penis or a vulva? That's what you're asking, right? In reality, yeah, we won't know if that baby is a boy or a girl or non-binary until they're old enough to tell us. So there's a lot of other great things that you can ask, like how's the health of the baby? What's their name? All of these other things, because no matter how like I don't know, progressive you are, once you know the assigned sex of a baby, you're going to start putting gender norms on that baby, whether you like it or not. So the longer you can go without knowing, the better. And yeah, male female options without others on forms. This one gets me all the time. There's always a male female other box, which is literally othering people, and not does not feel very fun at all. So when possible, a fill-in box is really, really great, because it allows people to self-identify. And then the last one here, again, a really big one, especially in the English language, hello, sir or ma'am. We say these things to be polite, right? But misgendering people is like not very polite. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a cafe or something and people are like, oh, how can I help you, ma'am? And I'm like, you just ruined my whole day by saying that one word, right? So it's better to try and drop that. Okay, so we have a lovely long initialism here. This is not even the full initialism. I like to say, but the point is it's long because we have a lot of different identities in our community, right? It's not just like a couple things that are represented here. So the actual initialism is probably so long that I couldn't even begin to remember all of it. But the point of it isn't really the initialism. It's not really the length of the initialism. It's literally that our community is made up of a very diverse amount of people. So nobody is going to ever ask you to remember that initialism. Even I do not necessarily always remember it. But we did want to show an expanded version just so that you have a better sense of some of the lesser known identities within our community, so that you have some idea of the types of people that we have. So now within Canada, you'll notice very frequently that our initialism starts with 2S. You may have seen it at the end originally, but we now try to put it at the beginning because it stands for Two Spirit, and that's a cultural specific identity coming from some Indigenous Canadian traditions. A couple of years ago, we were challenged at a conference by an Indigenous elder saying, hey, we were here first, so why are we like just kind of tacked onto the end? And we were like, you know what, that is a great point. So we started putting them at the beginning. So within Canada, you'll see that that's pretty common now. Um, and then we have the part of the initialism that a lot of people know. So L stands for lesbian, and that's a woman who's attracted to women or non-men. We have gay, which is a man who's attracted to men or non-women. You can also use that as kind of a general term. Most people are pretty okay with that, right? Like I might just say that I'm gay to make it quick and easy for people to recognize that I'm like part of the community without having to get into the very specifics of my identity. We have bisexual, that's somebody who's attracted to more than one gender, but possibly not all genders. Continuing on here, transgender we already covered. Again, that's somebody whose biology, that physical makeup of their body, doesn't align with their gender identity, I should say. So queer is making a huge comeback, right? So traditionally, or historically, I should say, we know that queer was used pretty commonly as a slur. And I would say, especially by the younger crowd, it's become reclaimed, I think, mainly because it doesn't have a specific definition, which I think a lot of people really like. It basically just means that you have some sort of non-normative experience of sexuality or gender or gender. So you don't really have to like go into like major details. It's a very open, very broad label, which is why a lot of people like it. Questioning is one that a lot of people don't realize is represented in our initialism. That's somebody who is unsure or questioning their gender or sexuality, and they're very important to our community because it allows people time and fluidity in figuring out who they are, basically. So this could be somebody who like uses it as a stepping stone to find a label or find an identity that fits them a little bit better. Or it could be somebody who's like, I might be like bisexual maybe. And then they give it a try and they're like, nope, that's not for me. Like I actually am straight, like, but it's nice that I got to try it out. So questioning can mean a lot of different things. It just gives people the ability to try. Intersex is somebody that we mentioned earlier, and that's somebody whose biology has both male and female traits or whose biology is ambiguous. So the physical makeup of their body has male and female traits. So traditionally, or in the past, we have used the word hermaphrodite, but that's no longer an acceptable term. We we use the term intersex instead. And yeah, intersex people are very common. A lot of people try and like use them as like a gotcha like thing in terms of like, oh, but they're such a small percentage of the population. They're it makes up quite a large percent in reality. They're about as common as people with red hair, but I like to use the stat more that they're about the same as the population size of Mexico. So like you can't really like completely disregard them as a people because they are very much existing. And most importantly, that's just people who know that they are intersex. You can go your whole life and not know because there are many different ways that intersex can show up in the human condition. There are times where a man has fathered children and has grandchildren, and it's not till he's like older that he gets an internal ultrasound done, and it turns out he has a uterus. Like, you know, there's so many different ways that we can be intersex. So yeah, it's pretty common. The last couple here, again, not last in general, but last for the ones we're presenting. Pansexual is somebody whose attraction is not dependent on gender. So it's just not something that they consider when they're looking at their partners. Asexual is somebody who doesn't experience sexual attraction and may or may not experience other forms of attraction. And aromantic is somebody who doesn't experience romantic attraction and may or may not experience other kinds of attraction. Important to remember that asexual and aromantic are also spectrums, which is a little bit more complex, which we can get into in another learning session if you choose to do it. But yeah, they're also a pretty complex group of people as well. And currently within Canada, we use the kind of short form of 2S LGBTQ+. You can also use 2S LGBTQ+ IA if you wanted to, or 2S LGBTQ IA+, sorry. And that's just kind of a shortened initialism. That plus sign obviously very important to represent all of the people that we can't fit into our little short form there. Does anybody have any questions? I know I just spewed a lot of information at you very quickly, but does anybody have any questions about anything we've covered so far? All right. I'm not seeing any hands or anything. I like to mention as well, like if you're worried about asking a question, like you don't know if you have the right terminology or something, please just ask it. Like I'm assuming positive intent in you. I'm assuming that you're asking questions in good faith. So even if you're unsure and you're like, I don't know if this is offensive, please just ask it. I will not be offended. I may use it as a gentle learning moment, but you will not be like judged for using incorrect language or anything like that. So we do have an anonymous question here. Um, uh, Somebody's child is non-binary and attracted to feminine presenting people. They've asked what their sexual identity is. Do you know? So non-binary lesbians do exist and they're totally valid. So it is possible that they are a non-binary lesbian for sure. I think the biggest thing about lesbianism is that you're just attracted to like non-men in some respects, like whether that's masculinity or whether that's just men in general, like male identifying people. But it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but they should try and maybe look into non-binary lesbianism. But it also is possible that they're just queer. Queer is such a great word, like I said, because it can mean so many different things to so many different people. So if lesbianism doesn't feel right to them, they can always use the term queer and they don't really have to explain. That's just who they are, right? So that might work for them as well. But congratulations on having a non-binary kid. It's pretty awesome. It's pretty cool. You're going to learn a lot from them. Does anybody else have any other questions? All right. I'm not seeing any, but that's okay. For the sake of time, we'll continue on here. And oh, sorry. If they're yeah, no, you can yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. So you can be a non-binary lesbian whether no matter how you feel, because non-binary is like, you can wake up one morning and feel super masculine and you dress masculine, and you can dress feminine. It doesn't really matter how you identify and how you dress or anything like that, because the two things are separate, right? So how you identify is different than who you're attracted to. But yeah, it sounds like that's what it sounds like to me. But again, if queer doesn't feel right to them, that's totally cool too. But yeah, look into non-binary lesbianism. I think lesbianism, you can get a lot of people trying to make it just about only women, but there's a huge group of people that are non-binary and also lesbians. So hopefully that helps. But we also have some really great youth groups and like youth what do you call it, like phone lines that they can call, and maybe they'd be better with helping them through that as well, and maybe they get a chance to explore a little bit. But yeah, great question for sure. All right, so continuing on here, we've used the term gender binary a couple times here. So basically that's just a classification of all people, sorry, into two fixed genders, right? So a lot of times throughout Western history, that's kind of where we've fallen. We're kind of forcing people into that gender binary. And we much prefer to think of gender with more complexity, right? Because there are 8 billion people on the in the world. It's kind of silly that we're trying to force them into two very specific boxes. So we like to think of gender as this color wheel, right? So you can still have the stereotypical like women are pink and men are blue. But there allows for a lot of different choice for everyone, including cisgender people, right? So it could be that you're a woman, but maybe you don't identify as strongly with your womanhood. So you're more like of a desaturated pink versus somebody who's like super strongly leaning into their womanhood and is like a super saturated pink. Like you can fall in any number of categories and have a little bit more choice and option with how you identify, right? Even as a cisgender person. And when we talk about gender, there's a lot of different terms that fall under this concept of gender. So we've talked about gender identity, right? That's our identity, our sense of self. There's also gender expression. And that's how somebody chooses to express that identity to the world. Everyone has a gender expression, whether you're in our community or not. And it's basically just how you express, right? So it's your clothing, your hairstyles, your voice, could be your mannerisms, it's your pronouns. That's another way that gender expression shows up. And when we are unable to be open about our gender identity, sometimes our expression doesn't match, quote unquote, our gender identity as well, right? So another great example of this that I like to use is a butch lesbian, for instance. So she identifies as a woman, very much is a woman, but her gender expression is very masculine, right? So there's a lot of different ways that gender identity and gender expression can kind of like match up. There's an infinite combination. So it's just important to remember that sometimes when you're looking at a person, or actually anytime you're looking at a person, you can't be sure of their gender identity until they tell you, right? So just important, yeah, to remember that gender expression will not always match, quote unquote, their gender identity. All right, so some more important terms here. Gender dysphoria, you've probably heard about if you're listening to any type of news recently around like trans issues and stuff like that. Basically, it's the distress that's caused between somebody's assigned sex at birth and their gender identity. So many, but not all, transgender and non-binary and other kind of gender diverse people may experience this. Not all of them will, but most of them do. And it's basically just like something about your biology is preventing you from being seen as your true gender identity. So so there's something about either your body or your voice or your mannerisms or something that when you go out in public, people do not view you the way that you want to be viewed. So for like a trans man, maybe he has like super wide hips and people just see his hips and are like, oh, that must be a woman. You know what I mean? So it's like these weird cues that we have that make us kind of identify people in a way that they aren't comfortable being identified. But gender euphoria also exists, and we never talk about that. Trans people are very often defined by their suffering, so it's very important that we also talk about the opposite, which is gender euphoria. That's just the joy and validation of being seen as your true gender. And most people experience this on the daily, especially cisgender people experience this on the daily, but it's just so natural to you that you don't think about it, right? A great example, actually, you even experience gender dysphoria as well. And I use the example of like, if you get a haircut and you decide to go super short, like pixie cut as a woman, let's say, and you're like, oh my God, I feel so masculine. I hate this haircut. That's gender dysphoria. That's gender dysphoria. It's that feeling of like, I don't feel like myself. I don't feel feminine. Like I feel very masculine with this haircut or whatever. Gender euphoria is you buy, let's say again, as a woman, you buy like a dress that you really, really love and it fits you perfectly and you just feel super feminine and comfortable. And that's that feeling, right? Of like, wow, I just feel so comfortable in my body. I feel so um just, yeah, like defined and joyful in how I'm being experienced, how I'm going to be perceived by others, those types of things. So gender euphoria, everybody experiences, and it's really important to talk about because it's not often talked about, to be quite honest. Gender nonconforming refers to somebody whose appearance or behavior doesn't conform to traditional gender norms. Importantly, it is not a synonym for non-binary. Anyone, cisgender people included, can be gender nonconforming. So this could be a woman who doesn't shave her legs or armpits. It could be a man who shows vulnerability or wears makeup or skirts, possibly. And yeah, cisgender individuals can be gender nonconforming in some ways, like even up till like I don't know, the 1990s, it was like seen as a weird thing for women to wear suits, right? That was a gender non-conforming thing. So a lot of different ways that those gender norms shift, and therefore a lot of us become gender non-conforming as those gender norms kind of shift. So transitioning is the process of changing one's gender presentation to better align with their gender identity. Really important, this may or may not include medical treatments, right? So gender transitioning happens generally in a more social matter. So social transition is pretty common. But everybody's transition is very different, and very important that we don't ask people, like, especially when it comes to medical stuff, do not ask them about medical transition. It's very personal, right? So some people may not be wanting to get anything done, and so by asking that, you maybe are kind of making them feel uncomfortable in their body, like suddenly, oh, should I be worried about this, or should I start thinking about this? So just remember that everybody's transition is going to be completely different than another's, and what they choose to get done or not get done, or what they choose to do and not do, does not mean that they're less valid, right? There's multiple different reasons people can choose to get these things done or not. And it's not really anyone's business but theirs. So misgendering is when somebody either intentionally or unintentionally uses incorrect pronouns, or some sort of language that does not correctly reflect somebody's gender. And yeah, a lot of people ask, if you misgender somebody, like, what do you do? Best thing is to think of it kind of like stepping on somebody's toe, right? When you step on somebody's toe, you don't just like suddenly prostrate yourself and be like, oh, I'm so sorry, like, I'm actually like a huge ally to people with feet, like, I totally, I wouldn't think of you like any other way, like, whatever. No, you just say, oh, I'm so sorry, and you know, correct your walk-in or whatever, and you move on, right? Because it makes it way less uncomfortable. As soon as you put the onus on the person that you hurt to make you feel better about your mistake, it becomes really uncomfortable, right? So if you're just briefly apologizing, correcting yourself, and moving on, I promise you, if it was intentional, people do not apologize at all. So if the fact that you even just give a brief apology, people will know it wasn't intentional. So please, yeah, just make it not a big deal, apologize, correct yourself, move on. And then lastly, dead naming, similar but slightly different, is basically just using a trans or non-binary's birth name, trans or non-binary person's birth name without their consent. So obviously a lot of us change our names throughout our transition to find a name that suits our gender identity better. So yeah, try not to use their old name if possible. So a couple more, I guess I can go through these one by one here. So a couple more terms and lesser known identities, I guess. Non-binary is maybe a little bit better known, but you've heard me say it a couple times here. So basically it's just an umbrella term meaning anyone whose gender is outside the binary of man or woman. So maybe they feel like both a man or a man and a woman. Maybe they feel like neither. Maybe they feel a little bit like a man, but like not at all like it's like any number of combinations and infinite ways to be non-binary, but it just basically means that you don't feel like a man or a woman. Agender is somebody who doesn't have a gender. They don't feel particularly attached to any gender. So on our color wheel, they would just be a transparent canvas. They're not as common, but again, good to know that they also exist. And then lastly here, again, lastly for this, but there are tons of other different genders. Gender fluid is somebody whose gender identity changes over time, right? So it's not the same as let's say a trans woman who transitions in her life. Gender fluid is like much more fluid. So one week you feel super feminine and you want to use she, her pronouns, and wear dresses and makeup and all this stuff. And then next week you're like, no, I'm feeling super masculine this week. I'm going to use he, him pronouns, like whatever. So they tend to change much more fluidly with like how they're feeling, maybe the weather, like there's so many different things that can change how they're feeling. So we have a question here. A coworker has recently transitioned. How can you go about supporting them and ensuring that you can learn from them what they need? How do you make it natural and non-invasive? You want to ensure that you're being an ally and appropriately acknowledging their tradition. Yeah, that is a great question. So I would say it really doesn't hurt from a perspective of like allyship to just check in with that person. You don't have to ask them like, you know, like, what are you getting done or anything. You can just be like, how have you found, how have you found the workplace like since you've started transitioning? Like, is there anything that I can do to support you? Are you noticing like anyone misgendering you? Maybe I can talk to them for you. Like, but it is always good to check in with that person before taking it upon yourself to do those things, right? So like, um, don't go and talk to a person that you know that they're having issues with without talking to the transgender person first, if that makes sense, because you don't want to intercede like a relationship. You don't want to like kind of force yourself into something. But yeah, just honestly asking and just reaching out and saying, hey, I'm like so excited and happy for you. Please let me know if there's any ways that we can support you further, like anything that you need. Is there anything I can do specifically to make you feel more comfortable, or that can help your transition here at all, or anything like that? It really doesn't hurt to just reach out and lend a hand, basically. Yeah, exactly. Just check in, right? Because it's like anything, right? Like, you know, if you are new to a workplace, let's say, just checking in with a new employee and being like, "Hey, how are you finding the place? Like, you know, are you having any issues with anything?" Like those sorts of things. It's really helpful. So yeah, that's a great way to do it. Just a gentle check-in. And you can always do this multiple times, like every couple months, just to see and make sure that they still continue to feel supported. So we talked a little bit about some cultural specific identities. We talked about two-spirit people. So that's a broad identity specific to Indigenous peoples of North America. It can refer to an individual with a feminine and masculine spirit, and it may refer to their sexuality, their gender, or their spiritual identity. Two-spirit is kind of a a word that bridges kind of Western concepts of gender and sexuality and Indigenous concepts of gender and sexuality. So when somebody tells you that they're two-spirit, you still have no idea what their identity is. It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It's really just a courtesy, I will say, to kind of colonizers or settlers, so that we have some sense of like their identity, but in reality we do not have the complexities in our language and our culture to understand fully, right? So think of it as kind of a courtesy. But yeah, so they have been highly praised and honored within a lot of Indigenous communities, and seen as kind of sacred leaders. And they are not the only cultural specific identity that shows that gender is not just man and woman. Throughout the world, this is a non-exhaustive list. I will say this is actually a very short list of a very, very long list of many different types of cultures that have third genders, different sexualities, mainly like multiple genders in general. So the big one here is the Hijra in South Asia. They're actually a legally recognized third gender in India. The Mushe, the Brahmanesha, Koriwami, Sakrata, all of these are examples of different gender identities throughout the world. The big thing that we're trying to show here is there are examples of this literally on every continent except for Antarctica, obviously. And so why would Western society be any different? We've always existed. Even within the Western history, we have existed. Just the fact that you have not seen us is the fault of who's in charge of writing the history books, right? But we have always been here. And yeah, all of these lovely other cultures are great proof that it's more than just men and women out there. So we did touch on pronouns briefly. So personal pronouns are just words, obviously, we use to refer to a person without naming them. Pretty much everyone has them. 99.9% of people have them. There are some people who prefer not to use pronouns at all, which is also totally valid, but most people do have them. So the most common ones that we know in English for singular use pronouns are she, her, hers, he, him, his, and they, them, theirs. Some people say that they, them is like grammatically incorrect, but we use it all of the time without noticing it, right? So a great example is like the doctor calls, right? And your partner says like, oh, what did they say? Obviously, it wasn't like 6 doctors calling, it was one person, but the gender of that person does not matter, right? Very common, very, very commonly used. There are also things called neopronouns, which I'm going to show you right now. They look very scary, but I promise you they are not that scary. They were introduced, at least 1 or 2 sets of them were introduced by academia in the 1940s to kind of replace the he/she in academic papers. And neopronouns are very, very rare. I'm a person who's relatively involved in the queer community, and I only know of one person who uses them. So it's one of those things where it's good to know that they exist. And if you meet somebody who uses them, I promise if you ask them pronunciation and how to use them in a sentence, they will happily tell you because not very many people bother to ask. So if you just say, hey, could you like pronounce those for me? And can you show me how to use them in a sentence? And then it's just about practice. I promise the more you practice, the easier it gets. It's the same thing with when somebody transitions, right? The more you practice and talk about that person as if like when they're not there, obviously, the easier it gets and the more it rolls off the tongue. So practice really does make perfect. But yeah, you'll probably go your whole life and not meet somebody with nil pronouns, but again, just good to know that they exist. So a couple times throughout the presentation, I've talked about different forms of attraction, right? So um, there are different forms of attraction, basically. So we know that sexuality is different than gender identity, and that's the type of people that you're attracted to, right? So you may be a man, let's say, and you could be attracted to other men. So your gender identity is man, but your sexuality is gay because you're attracted to other men. And there are 5 types of attraction. People who are allosexual, which are people who are not asexual. You do not need to use that term for yourself. I will say it's mostly just for asexual people to refer to people unlike them. But if you are allosexual, you don't have to be like, I am an allosexual, like whatever. You don't need to say that. It's totally fine. Typically, as allosexual people, we experience most, if not all of these at the same time for different types of people, right? So we have sexual attraction, the desire to have sex with someone. Sensual attraction is like physical contact, so it's like hugs, hand holding, that type of thing. Romantic attraction is the desire to have a romantic, like deep connection with a person. Platonic is friendship, basically. And aesthetic attraction is when you receive pleasure from somebody's appearance. I always like to use the example of like, I think we all know a heterosexual man in our lives who is able to say like, Idris Elba is a beautiful man. You know what I mean? Like that's the type of feel we're going to, like they don't want to do anything with him, but they're like, that is a handsome man. It's like, yes, we know. That's the type of vibe of aesthetic attraction. So like I said, allosexual people tend to feel a lot of these at the same time for the same type of person. So maybe you see like, I don't know, an attractive guy walking by and you're like, I might like to get to know him, and then like maybe become friends and romantic and then, you know, have sex with him, like all these things. So we tend to feel all of those at the same time. But all of us will have different variations of this, right? And different connections to different ones. So maybe you're like a super sensual person who's like very huggy and handholdy and like likes that type of stuff. Whereas you might know somebody else who's like, nope, I hate holding hands with my partner. I'm not a big hugger. Like I need my physical space, like all of this stuff. So we all have different levels of how we feel these things. And most importantly, some of us may feel none like within these categories, right? So we talked about asexual people and aromantic people, for instance. So yeah, it's varying degrees for every different type of person. So this is again, unfortunately, non-exhaustive list of different forms of discrimination within our community. So I'm not going to go over all of these just for the sake of time. But if you wanted to screenshot and like take a better look in your own time, you're welcome to. Bi and panphobia is the mistrust or disgust of people who are bisexual or pansexual. That's like that age-old myth of like bisexual people are more likely to cheat on their partners, that kind of thing. Simply not true. That's just, yeah, biphobia. There's transmisogyny and transmisogynoir, which is the intersectional kind of a form of oppression, which talks about transmisogyny, talks about transphobia, misogyny, sexism, and in the case of transmisogynoir, it's also talking about anti-Blackness. And TERF is also a really important word to know, but again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into it, so I would recommend you do a bit of research on that as well. Some terms to avoid here. This is mainly for allies, I would say. Like if you hear somebody within our community using these terms, don't correct them. It's totally fine. Closeted and openly gay. Better to just say not out or not public. Gay marriage or gay married. It's just marriage. You don't need to be like, my cousin's getting gay married this weekend. It's just the same thing. It's just marriage. Homosexual and same sex kind of conflate that idea of gender and sexuality. Homosexual as well has like a pretty not great past medically with our community, so we try and not use that as much. So you can say stuff like same gender partner, that's absolutely fine. But same sex again alludes to this idea of like sex and gender being the same thing. Sexual preference, I think a lot of us know, is better to say sexual orientation, and a gay, a queer, those are adjectives, they're not nouns, right? So it's better to humanize a gay person, a queer person, those types of things. Does anybody have any questions before we move on? I'm not seeing any more. Again, for the sake of time, I'm going to keep going here. I'm happy to stay a little bit after as well to answer any questions anybody might have. That's really fine. There are a lot of different reasons why people would choose to come out, and why not to come out, right? So maybe they're afraid of losing friends and family. They're afraid people won't believe them. Maybe they're already in a male-female relationship and that means a lot to them. And they don't want to maybe harm that person. But there's a lot of really good reasons to come out as well. So maybe they're tired of pretending, they have supported loved ones. And a big one for me anyway is to help show others that it's okay to do so, right? The more we see others people's stories, the more we can relate to those people and like feel more comfortable being ourselves. I think for the sake of time, I'm going to skip over these 2 slides just because we're running a bit short on time, but there are a lot of 2S LGBTQ plus people in Canada. And the big number here that I like to point out is especially transgender youth, or sorry, 2S LGBTQ plus youth face about 14 times the risk of suicide and substance abuse than their peers. But if they have one accepting adult, so that can be anybody, that can be a friend's mom, it can be a counselor, it can be, anyone, there's 40% less likely to attempt suicide. So you can be that person if you know a queer kid in your life and you support and validate them, you can be that person to help them through. So just briefly here, we're going to talk about intersectionality. In our 201, we dive a lot more in depth into intersectionality and privilege. So if that was something you're interested in learning more about when it comes to the queer community, please feel free to look into that as well. But intersectionality is basically an understanding of how somebody's overlapping identities shifts and changes their experience, right? So specifically, it was created to talk about how they experience oppression and discrimination along those lines. When we kind of think about intersectionality, we consider it more like A plus B equals like an intersectional identity. But in reality, it kind of multiplies how we experience oppression, right? So a Black gay man will experience oppression for being Black, for being gay, but also for being Black and gay in specific situations, right? So all of these things kind of multiply and make a very intersectional identity. These are all places that you're going to find yourself, right? Like we all have these identities, but it's whether we hold privilege in these identities or not, right? So you may hold privilege because of your race, but you may be oppressed because of your physical health, for instance, or your religion. So there's different ways that we can find ourselves on this list, just whether we hold privilege or not. And some ways that these intersectional identities kind of face additional barriers and additional challenges. Again, I won't go through all of these for the sake of time, but a big one is that multiple communities aren't understanding each other, right? So stuff like racism, ableism, ageism, all of those things exist within our community. Because again, we are such a huge community that of course we have people who are unfortunately, racist, ableist, all of these things within our community. So if you are, let's say, a Black person who's coming to a queer event, a lot of queer events are very white, right? So coming into our community, not knowing if other Black people are going to be there can be very uncomfortable because you don't want to be the only one there who isn't white, right? So little things like that can really create barriers, right? Especially when entering our community. So that's why accessibility is so important, why taking an intersectional lens to any type of activism is incredibly important, right? Because if you're going to stand up for one type of person, you have to be standing up for all of the people who hold those identities, right? No matter what other intersections they hold. We all hold privilege in some way, right? Whether that's, again, our gender, our race, whatever. There are many different ways that we can use our privilege. Again, I won't touch on all of these, but a big one, or a couple big ones here. So performative activism is basically like when you put, like, let's say I go to a cafe and I see a little rainbow sticker on the cafe door. I'm like, yes, this is awesome. It's a safe space. I'll go in and I'm going to be so respected. And then I walk in and they're like, how can I help you, ma'am? It's not really a safe space, is it? Right. So it's that performativeness of like, oh yeah, we accept everyone, but they're not actually doing the work to accept everyone, if that makes sense, right? So it's all well and good to like say I accept everyone, but what are you actually doing to be an ally to the people that you're trying to accept? And the other big one that I want to touch on here is not involving yourselves in issues because they're seen as political, right? It is a privilege to allow to just say, I don't want to be involved in this because it doesn't have to do with me. And when you stay silent, you automatically take the side of the oppressor, right? There's no gray space when it comes to human rights. So you either are for the people who are being oppressed or you are with the oppressor. There's unfortunately no middle ground. So really important to remember that you have to kind of involve yourself because for some people that's their lives and that's their realities. So by just like not involving yourself, you're aiding the oppressor. But there are a lot of different ways that we can use our privilege. So amplifying voices, obviously normalizing kind of standing up for anti-queerphobic or behavior. So like if you hear a quote queerphobic joke, that type of thing, and recognizing who's in the room when making decisions and including them. Because again, you're not, if for instance, you're trying to look at your physical space and make it more accessible for disabled people, if you don't have a disability advocate in the room, you're not going to get very far because you don't know what they need, right? So those types of things are really important when we're talking about accessibility and intersectionality. Does anybody have any questions before we get into our last little section? It's just a couple slides. I'm not seeing any hands or anything. But again, if you're still typing, please feel free to do so. I'm happy to answer questions at the end of the time too, so that people can hop off if they need to. So allyship, how can we all be better allies with some of this information that we now have, right? So just some kind of pointers, obviously listening to 2S LGBTQ plus people. Beyond that, also like believing us, right? So when we say this is an experience that we have, believe us, that is our experience. So all well and good to listen, but also remember like that is somebody telling you their experience. So you also have to believe them, that what they're telling you. Understanding your privilege and power, not a comfortable thing, to start breaking down how we hold privilege in this world. But I promise you, the more that you do it, one, the easier it gets, and two, you become a more empathetic and kind person by doing it. So it's really important to start breaking down how we hold privilege and what we can do with that privilege to amplify and advocate for others. Shut down queerphobic comments and behavior. That's can be difficult sometimes, but obviously make sure you're safe doing it. But it is important to do as well. A big one that I always say, if somebody makes like a queerphobic or racist or whatever, some sort of bigoted joke, just ask them to explain the joke. It immediately makes it super awkward because they have to then explain their bigotry to you and they automatically recognize that you are not an ally to that cause. To their cause, I should say. Obviously you're an ally to our cause, but yeah, so asking to explain a joke is a great way to diffuse a situation without like getting super detailed into it. And a big one that we've talked about a couple times, don't make assumptions, right? We can't assume somebody's gender. We can't assume somebody's sexuality, none of that just by looking at them. So the only way you're going to know is if you ask or if they tell you. Understand that you don't get to determine whether you're an ally, right? Even it's great to just say, I'm an ally and like put your little sticker on, but it's not just like you get to plant your flag down and be like, that's it, I've done it because I've declared that I'm an ally. No, you have to actually like do the work, right? So that's again, standing up for the people who need you. It's advocating, it's donating time or money or resources or doing unlearning. Those all count as allyship, right? Educating yourself, don't rely on queer people to do it for you. The biggest thing to remember here is like if you have like a gay, like so you have a gay friend and you go to them be like, hey, can you tell me everything about trans people in sports? They may not know the answer to that, right? So just because they are queer doesn't mean that they are a wealth of information when it comes to everything to do with queerness. And also it's not their job, right? It's just not their job. So yeah, there's plenty of really good actual good resources, I should say, online, including stuff like Spectrum, to start that learning process. Again, be ready to unlearn and be okay with being uncomfortable, and normalize putting pronouns and signatures, but don't mandate it. Couple different reasons for that. Mandating can be really uncomfortable if somebody's like exploring their gender identity and maybe isn't comfortable with putting that stuff in their signatures for one thing, but also mandating creates a lot of issues where it doesn't need to be issues. If you just allow people the choice, a lot of people are going to do it. And the people who don't, that's fine. That's their choice. They'll probably end up doing it further down the road when they realize how many people just do it automatically. So the last couple here, challenging your work and social situations to be more inclusive. I always say follow people on social media who do not look like you. That's like a great way to start kind of learning and understanding other people's life experiences. Don't speak for 2S LGBTQ plus people, use privilege to amplify voices. Supporting 2S LGBTQ plus owned businesses, honestly, any marginalized business, really, really great. They exist all year round too, not just during Pride Month. So if you have birthdays to shop for, holidays, anything like that, feel free to look into them as well. And of course, educating yourself on other issues like racism, ableism, all of those other isms, to support all people in our community, not just one type of person. So all right, I think I'll skip over this slide as well, just so that we can get into some resources here. So just quickly before we finish up today, these are some resources that you can look into. If you want to screenshot this, you're welcome to. For anyone though, Spectrum obviously is a great place to start. We tend to have a lot of these resources accessible from our website as well. So if you just go there, a lot of these will be linked from our resources as well. But another great one for allies, PFLAG is incredible. They're parents and friends of lesbians and gays, but they work mostly with transgender families of transgender children as well right now, obviously. So if you have any questions or kind of questions and stuff you want to research from an ally perspective, that's a great way to start. All right. So I'm happy to sit around and answer any questions that people might have. I know we had to kind of blast through that. Our lunch and learn is like a lot of information very quickly, so I apologize. And just before you leave today, I did put a little link into the chat. So it's just an evaluation so that we can try and tailor this to be better for people in the future. Takes literally like 3 to 5 minutes. So if you can fill that out, we would really, really appreciate it. And I am happy to just sit here and wait for people to ask any questions. If you do need to hop off, though, I understand that this is probably lunch hour for some of you, so please feel free to hop off at any time. But I really, really appreciate everybody joining me today, and I hope you learned something, and I hope you have a great rest of your week as well.